First question will be for the mayor and city council candidates. Greg, we'll start with you. Do you support land use management? If you do, why? And if you do not, why not?
Yeah, land use management is a very hot topic in the city of Linton for sure. For me, I do support a land use management policy that would help us to clean up this city. I don't think that policy needs to be so restrictive as to not allow the citizens to do with their private property what they want within some guidelines about the overall look and feel of our city. The idea of creating a dump station on South XYZ Street because it's your private property and you can do with it what you want doesn't make for a very comprehensive and cohesive community. So I am in favor of some land use, yes.
I've never really given that a lot of thought, but land use management, I think yes, I am. There are certain areas that do need to be managed, cleaned up. As far as how much, I don't know. I don't believe in zoning or anything, but I do think there should be some regulations written up and followed.
I'm like Greg. I agree that we need to have some, but when you go into this, you got to remember that the properties, the way they are now, they're grandfathered in. So if you've got a neighbor that decides to have a junkyard before the land use management gets put in, he's good to go. I mean, it's unfortunate, it's not fair, but that's just the way it is. So I'm in favor of some of it. We have good ordinances here in Linton. We've enforced them. We've cleaned up several properties. In fact, a few years ago, I got to work with the county and we got over an $800,000 grant for blight elimination program. We tore down several houses here in Linton and were able to sell the property. We didn't sell it, but the property was turned over to Biggs and Company. Down in my area, there's several, I call them duplex houses and single homes that can be purchased as rent to own for certain people who qualify. So I think some land use management is good. I'm not for total zoning, but you got to remember a lot of stuff, whether you like it or not, will be grandfathered in and you can't touch it.
If we're talking about land management, it depends on me how you write it up. If you're talking about zoning to get industry to come into a certain area of town, like to start an industrial park or something, yes, we need that. As far as for the individual properties that we have around town, in a way we do have land management on our blighted properties that would go after. I would like to see us, we clean up a lot of properties and that piece of property sits there empty. And in town, let's face it, we're not gonna have people come in and spend $100,000, $200,000 to build a home on a vacant lot, depending on the area of town it's in. I'd like for us to take a real hard look at our ordinances that we have on our property, what can go on, what can't go on, because not everybody can afford a brand new home. But if we get cheap living houses formed and work with that area, I think land management would be a good thing to look at.
I think land management is something that we have to look at. The thing, because I've talked to several people about this, land management, when you talk about that, they immediately think of Monroe County, and they think about the strict land management zoning requirements they have over there. And nobody wants to see that level of zoning or land management in this city. The thing is, you need to have some kind of, I don't say control, but some kind of influence. I do not want somebody building a big shed next to my house just to put their RV in that's going to block my view. Those are the kind of situations I think that we need to address and look at from a land management perspective. And I think it's also something that industry looks at or businesses look at when they're wanting to go into a location, is what kind of land management is the city dealing with or they have implemented. Davies County has a limited land management that I think has been very effective because I've dealt with them on the Westgate Authority. Greene County doesn't. Can we the city, implement land management without the county? That's a good question. I don't know the answer. But I do think land management needs to be addressed and needs to be looked at. I don't want somebody building a chicken coop next to my house either. It's just one of those situations that, yeah, it may be tough, but when you got a half a lot and all you got is that, and you want to build a huge warehouse or a huge garage, that could be impacting several houses around you. And that's something that needs to be considered from a neighborly standpoint. So I think land use management needs to be looked at. It needs to be very, very limited on what can happen, and it can't be additive like Monroe County. That is just way too strict. It's not worth it for the city of Linton, for a lot of communities, in my opinion, but it does need to be looked at as a viable option.
I've dealt with this issue sitting on the county council with the commissioners. The big misconception, just like up here, people confuse land management with zoning. There's a huge difference. Usually if you go into land management, you're just turning the land into agriculture, residential, industrial. That's not telling you what color you can paint your house, anything like that in zoning wise. It's a very double-edged sword because you have to keep tabs on it, as John said, but you're going to have changing boards that come and go. Councils, commissioners, they may have different ideas. You can't let it get out of hand, or it will get out of hand. It will turn into zoning. But I am for land management if it stays just in those three areas. But you have to be careful with it. It's a very, very slippery slope. You can end up like Monroe County real quick if you get the wrong people in.